Today we're going to be talking about the very bare essentials that you need to have within a C++ program so that it compiles and runs correctly. We're going to do this by taking a look at a very simple C++ document. If at any point in time you want a more detailed explanation about what a line of code does, feel free to pause the video and click on it. Let's start at the top and work our way down. First, we have these two include statements. Include statements are how we include classes and functions from other libraries or other files. In this case, I'm including IOStream, which allows us to print things to standard out, and stream, which allows us to use various string manipulation functions. These are both C++ standard libraries. If you ever have a question about the documentation about a C++ standard function, you can always Google it. cplus.com/reference is a good resource. The next line that we have here is using namespace standard. What a namespace is basically a way of scoping classes and functions. So for example, if you had a function foo within a C++ standard library, and then you also declared a function foo within your code, and you call foo somewhere, the namespace will help the compiler know which foo you want to reference. All of the C++ standard library functions are within the namespace standard. There are actually three common ways that we use namespaces with C++. One is by, after the include statements, putting the lines using the namespace followed by two colons followed by whatever function you're going to be using. Those two semicolons are called the scope resolution operator, and all it does is specify for the compiler which namespace the function belongs to. Another way that we can declare the namespace for a function is whenever we call the function, we can preface it with the namespace followed by the scope resolution operator. And the final way that we can use namespaces is the way that we have in our code here, which is using namespace standard. This basically sets the default namespace for the whole piece of code. So if any function doesn't have a definition immediately within this document, the compiler will go looking in the libraries that you included at the top of your code. Now we get into the real meat of the code. Int main is the function that our program will always start executing with. So our first line here is cout hello world followed by endl. What cout does is it prints whatever follows to standard out, so to your terminal in this case. These two little less than signs are the insertion operator. This is how you feed different things into cout. You can feed string literals like we did in this case with hello world, or as you see later, we can feed in variables. You can feed in as many different things as you want into cout by separating them with the insertion operator. Then finally we have endl. Endl is a function that just prints a new line to the standard output, so it's basically like hitting enter. Our next line is declaring a string name and initializing it to have the value Kelly. Pretty straightforward. Then our last line here is again utilizing cout with a string literal and then our variable. So what this will end up printing out to the screen is my name is followed by Kelly followed by a new line. Hopefully this code seems a little less mysterious now. So now let's talk about how we would compile and run a C++ program. Most of your C++ files will end in .cpp. So if we wanted to compile a single .cpp file program, we would type the name of our compiler. I'm using Clang, but you could also use GCC. So I'll type clang++ intro.cpp, and we see there were no errors. If I take a look, this new a.out has been made in my directory. So that's the executable for the code that we just compiled. If I wanted to name the executable something else besides a.out, I would type clang++ followed by the file name, followed by -o, and the name of the executable I would want. So maybe my executable. So now you can see it created an executable with the name that I declared. Now to run the executable is very simple. You just type // followed by the executable name. So my exec in this case, and we see that it worked. It printed out hello world, my name is Kelly. Now before I let you go, I want to just show you one little tip to help you when you're running your programs. I almost guarantee you that there will be some time when you're programming when you compile your code and everything's going great and you run it and something like this happens where you hit an infinite loop. Now if this ever happens, just type Control-C or Control / and that will quit your program for you. Now remember that this was a very basic C++ program. In future videos, we'll go more in depth into the different functionality that C++ provides for you. This is also a very basic example of compiling. In a future video, we'll go over how you can compile programs with multiple files. But hopefully this at least showed you the very basics of how to use include statements, namespaces, and how to print things to standard out. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask the course staff or look things up online. Thank you.